on, guys? Welcome back into the channel, and in today's video we're going to be visiting one of the most exciting topics in Madden franchise mode this year, which is the addition of the age, progression, regression, and positional progression and regression sliders that are now available here within Madden 24. This is one of the best additions and something that should have been in the game for a long time, but one of the best additions that they've made to Madden and franchise mode in general in a very long time. This allows you to have a lot of control over when and how hard players progress and regress through the actual system within Madden 24. So let's go ahead and jump into these section by section, with the first section being the offensive progression XP rate. As you can see here, we have all of these actually lowered quite a bit within our franchise, and even same thing with our defensive side of things. And this is just simply how fast these players are going to progress. I'm going to move my camera real quick so you guys can actually see the descriptions that are available for you. And for most of these sliders, and all of these sliders actually, it's going to be if you reduce the percentage, meaning the numbers go below 100, you're going to be slowing the XP gain, or you're going to be reducing whatever it is. And if you increase above the percentage, or increase above 100, for example, you're going to be increasing the percentage. And so for this one, for example, this is almost more so just an XP direct thing like we've been able to do in the past, which is just controlling how quickly these positions gain XP on a general basis. And so we generally take a lot of these down because it is very easy to build a super team within Madden, within franchise mode, and they progress very quickly, especially with breakout challenges, especially with weekly awards and yearly awards and everything else that you can possibly get. It's very, very easy to gain XP within this game. So our leagues, for example, play on reduced XP sliders for all of these positions, and we kind of adjust it position by position because there are certain positions that do not progress as quickly. It's real easy, for example, to progress a quarterback, a running back, a tight end, and a receiver. You just have to feed them the ball, but it's less easy to progress a fullback and an offensive lineman, as you can see, because their XP bars or their XP sliders here are going to be a little bit higher. And then the same thing goes for the defensive side of the ball. Secondly, we are going to have the age progression XP rate, which is going to change how players progress at certain ages. So this allows you to kind of have a peek on where progression actually happens with your players, where it's going to happen the most and where it's going to happen the least. So as you can see here up in the top right corner, it says that player skills improve as they gain experience, reduce the percentage to slow XP progression, increase the percentage to speed up XP progression. So the highest progression is going to happen after their first couple of years in the league. And that's how we kind of have it set for our league. You guys can do it however you want, but essentially what we are doing here is we are keeping progression normal for the first year or two, and we are speeding up progression for the next 3 years of age within the league. So you guys can see, you know, not many players are going to be coming in at 20, 21 years old. So really you're going to be hitting the most progression as a player, getting up to your peak as a player in that 22, 23, 24, and 25 year age range. 26 is kind of where you're going to start to fall off a little bit in terms of your progression. By the time you're 25, 26, 27 years old, you have probably hit what you're going to be as an NFL player. And so we therefore then take our ratings down a bit. But all this is saying is that you get control over when these players are earning XP. Maybe you have a logic that says players should be earning the most XP in their later years. And there's an argument to be made for that because their XP bars are going to be so big in these later years that it's going to be almost impossible to progress players if they're that old. Let's say I have Geno Smith, which I do in franchise mode right now at quarterback, and he's 30 years old. This setup here where we've reduced the percentage of XP gain, we've reduced the percentage of progression for these age groups, is going to make it really hard for Geno Smith to ever get any better than the 80 or 81 overall that he already is. As you can see, he's getting 40% gain progression at the age of 30, and it keeps going down year over year, and his XP bar is going to be bigger. It's going to require more and more and more to progress this player. So there are arguments to be made on both sides, but in either case, you are moving this bar to the right in order to increase the progression rate at a certain age, and you're moving it to the left to decrease the progression rate at a certain age. I don't know that there's a ton that you really need to do to edit in here, but it is nice to be able to control it and edit it based on your league's needs, your franchise's needs, and what you want to accomplish within franchise mode. Like I said, we're trying to do it realistic, so you're not going to be able to progress much beyond the age of 26, 27, 28 years old. It's going to be pretty difficult, and so that's how we have it set up for our franchises, but there are hundreds of other ways that you could configure it, knowing that we now actually have the access to the sliders to be able to do so. What is arguably the most important factor here, however, is your offensive regression rate and your defensive regression rate. These are going to be the most important for what's going on with franchise and what we have needed the most. And as you can see in the top right, you are going to reduce the percentage to slow regression, and you're going to increase the percentage to speed up regression. So move the bar to the right to increase regression, move the bar to the left to decrease regression. Those are a couple of things here that we want to edit, and one of those would be quarterbacks, for example. We want to slow regression for quarterbacks because quarterbacks is one of the positions where they last the longest within the NFL. These players are playing into their late 30s. It's one of the few positions that they can do that because they're not taking as much of a physical beating. Maybe even some of the other skill positions as well. But for running back, for example, we've seen now that NFL running backs are falling off before they ever even hit the age of 30, significantly earlier than almost any other position in the NFL. Their longevity just hasn't been there. And so we move the bar to the right in order to increase their regression as they go through. So we can now see that halfbacks are at 150. I would probably honestly take quarterbacks over to about 50. I would drop it all the way down so that quarterbacks are not regressing as much, but halfbacks are regressing twice as much essentially. And then again, you can do this for each position however you see it. We try to approach it from a realistic perspective where you can see, certain positions do regress harder at certain points in time, and we can get into that further when we get to the actual age regression rate where players start to regress. But this is really crucial to franchise players and franchise owners. And you also have a defensive regression rate for each of these positions. Again, move it to the right in order to increase their regression, move it to the left to decrease their regression. So certain positions tend to cycle out of the league quicker, like cornerbacks and safeties. I mean, there are some older ones within the league, but oftentimes once they lose a step, they lack the ability to keep up, they regress out of the league in the NFL. That's not necessarily the case in Madden, so we speed up that regression a little bit. And finally, we get to the age regression rate, which is hand in hand with everything else that we've already covered. Again, it's going to be the same thing. Reduce this to slow regression, increase this to speed up regression. So if we move this bar to the right, players are going to be regressing more at this specific age. If we move this to the left, players are going to be regressing less at a specific age. Now, as it stands right now, we typically don't see a whole lot of regression at the age of 26, 27, 28 years old. Once players start to turn 29 and 30, we see a tiny bit of regression in base Madden. So if you want players to cycle out of the league more quickly, if you tend to have leagues that have players going much more further into their careers than they normally would, or you have teams that are too OP, then you might want to start to turn up regression sooner, which is a little bit of what you're seeing here. And we start to see more and more and more and more and more progression tied towards the later stages of a player's career into the 30s. And that's, a realistic approach from us again. But as you can see, 35 plus years old are going to be taking significantly more regression than players at 26 years old, and that's combined with the fact that the game is already regressing players at a certain rate. And so again, I want to emphasize the fact that if you have already seen something in Madden at a certain age or at a certain position, whether it be quarterbacks regress or later than another position, and for example, your players start to really regress once they hit the age of 30, combine that with what you're doing with the sliders here, because when you come in as a base, these are all set to 100. So these aren't showing you automatically what's happening behind the scenes. You can modify on top of what's happening behind the scenes. So a great example of that is players at the age of 35 plus are already programmed in Madden to regress at a significantly higher rate than players at any of the ages below them. But all of these are still set to 100. So know that if you increase this rating above what it's already at, you're going to see increased regression on top of that. You're already going to see the curve where players at 35 plus are hitting the most regression out of anybody. You're just going to see additional on top of that. So you could kind of compensate for that. Let's say, for example, you wanted players to all regress at the same rate during each of their ages. You would want to go with kind of a reverse here. You would want to say 26 is at 200 and so on and so forth, because that would bring the 26-year gap closer to what's already happening with the 35 pluses, and you would just kind of go down the list such as this. So this is kind of compensating because each year they go along, they're already pre-programmed to start regressing more. This is just going to balance it out a little bit, and as you guys can see, it kind of almost works out to be a perfect curve. That's one way to balance it out as an example. So now the age of 26 is tuned up. They're actually going to be regressing, where we already know the players at the age of 35 are regressing pretty hard. So I'm not saying that that's what you should do in franchise mode. I'm just saying that that is an available option, and that is how you would go about balancing those things out, and that's how these things relate to each other. So it can be a little bit confusing to think about how these things operate, especially when you consider that you might want to tune these a certain way for certain ages, but there's already factors within the game that are affecting these players. So regression rate now typically starts at the age of 28, 29, and definitely starts at the age of 30. Depending on what happens with your player, you might see a little bit of regression at the age of 28 and 29, but you definitely start to see regression on every player at the age of 30. But again, these are all preset to 100, so it's not showing you what's going on behind the scenes. You have to kind of play with these sliders to work in tandem with what is already going on behind the scenes. And I hope that that makes sense, because it can be a little bit tricky to think about and a little bit tricky to play with, because there is no perfect solution here that I know of yet. And it is going to be a long process going through many franchises before we figure out what is the ideal way to set these to make it the most realistic to the NFL. But with all that being said, I hope that you found this video informative. If you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe down below. Let me know, have you done anything to your regression and progression sliders? This ties in right under XP sliders within Madden 24. It's a great new addition. Let me know what you're doing with these in your franchise mode. Let me know what video you guys want to see next. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.